that said, I am going to probably have the unenviable task of speaking theologically. You know, politicians have the good luck of being able to make some of the people happy some of the time, and theologians have the harder task of making no one happy ever. So there are a couple of things that I want to begin with, and one is, you know, for a lot of people, it certainly came to me this week that there was a lot of stress about what has happened and so on, and it put me in mind of a statement by a writer who I respect highly, Ludwig Wittgenstein, who made statement that meaning and happiness arise when we believe that we are thinking and living in accord with something deeper and greater than ourselves. I think that's a really apt statement. We are happy when we believe that we are living first in accord, and in accord with something greater and deeper than ourselves. Now, that doesn't mean that if you have that definition, happiness may not still be all that you expect it to be, because even with that definition, you can attach your happiness to the wrong things. But I think that one of the things that happened on Tuesday night was that sense of accord for many people just suddenly went away, and they kind of woke up to an America that they didn't really know or felt they didn't know, and really that's not necessarily tied to who anybody supported. It was just a sense that, you know, for weeks you have this kind of daily, hourly update about where everybody is and how things are going and what you can expect, and we all dutifully march in and suppose and vote and think, okay, well, tomorrow is another day, and we wake up to the same reality, and that didn't happen, and so a lot of the reaction was this deep disquiet about how to understand where you stand. I mean, what's going to happen, and what will that mean? And that's very understandable. It's very real. As a theologian, the work is really, yes, to acknowledge that, but then always to step back and reframe. And reframe according to what I would say is our faith. You know, Paul in Philippians, first of all says, rejoice always, right? Rejoice always, in any and all circumstances. Okay, that's challenge enough. And then you can legitimately ask whether, if you do that, if that's true, or whether it's just a mask, right? And if you read Paul enough, you'll find out that it's true, or Paul means it to be true. That he doesn't say, it's not like the song "Put on a Happy Face." You know, it's that even staring straight down into an abyss, if we have faith, then we have reason to rejoice. Even then, right? Most of us, you know, I can't tell you the number of times this week when I made a kind of intimation in that direction, and the immediate response from somebody was, I don't have that kind of faith.
Oh, that's good.
You know, and part of me wants to say, yeah, none of us do, or a few of us do. But that's the faith that we should have. And that's the faith that we try to, as a community, realize together, reinforce together, and then celebrate about together, right? To have that kind of faith. Paul then says, after he says, rejoice always, he goes immediately to say, whatever is good, whatever is true, whatever is excellent. Right? He said, now, think on these things. Right? Which is another way of saying, I'm asking you to rejoice in the middle of a really complex and convoluted world. So, A, do not tie your rejoicing to whether you're on the upside or the downside. Right? That will drive you crazy. And it will drive you to despair. Right? Your rejoicing happens no matter where you find yourself. And then think on these things, the things that edify. Right? We all have that opportunity. It doesn't matter what day it is, it doesn't matter who's in control, it doesn't matter what. We have that opportunity. And then he said, and these are words I've held really close to me for, most of my life. He said, I know how to be abased, and I know how to abound. Two great things. Right? A, to know how to be abased. Most of us get really lost in that territory. Right? But to know how to keep your footing when abased. And then, I love that he put that first. Because here's the even harder part. To know how to keep your footing when you abound. Right? Because if you are abounding, then you think, the world's your oyster, generally. And to really abound truthfully is a different enterprise. But Paul says, I know how to be abased, I know how to abound, and then he says, I can do any and all things through Christ who strengthens me. Now, I'd love to hold that really close to myself in times of great seismic shift publicly. Here's where it gets difficult. I think you find it when you feel that you live in accord with the revelation of God in its deepest sense. And one of the mistakes the American church makes over and over and over is this kind of easy correlation between, if things are going well for me, God must be on my side. If they're not going well for me, God must be doing something wrong. Right? Or, what I got a lot of this week is, well, that didn't go how I wanted. I'm not sure I can believe in God anymore. Right? And like, that's a dangerous God to believe in.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because it's the God in the mirror.
Right.
And we have to be deeply cautious of that all the time. Ecclesiastes 3 gives us a magnificent picture of life. For everything there is a time and a season for everything under the sun, right? You all know it, you've probably heard of it, funeral services and so on. It puts before us this dialectic, that's the only way I can think of it, of up and down, in and out, good and bad. There's a time to build up, there's a time to take down. There's a time to sing, there's a time to cry. There's a time to tear apart, there's a time to sew together. There's a time to pick up, there's a time to drop. That I don't care who you are, I don't care what the nature of your life is, you are involved in that rhythm. Right? And that rhythm ultimately comes to a point of there's a time to live and there's a time to die. Right? That's why it's often read at funerals. That's why it's probably only ever read at funerals. Because a lot of people don't want to come all the way to that point and say, this is our reality. Right? But it's true. There was a time when you were not. There is a time that you will not be again. Right? You have life for a while. It's called, theologically, a wonderful term, it's your allotted time. Right? That's the nature of your life. And interestingly, the prayer book means for that passage to be read at burials and stop right at that end, which is, There's a time to live and a time to die. Boom. Now, the text continues, and the text says something absolutely fascinating, which I haven't been able to shake. I mean, it just kind of follows behind me all the time. And it says, the writer says, okay, now, given that situation, what am I supposed to make of this? And he says a couple things. One, really good way to continue to lock into rejoicing. Everything is beautiful in its time. Right? Now, this is a guy who says over and over and over before this, vanity of vanities, everything's vanity. Right? But even in the midst of that, he can look at life and say, everything's beautiful in its time. That's something that we have to really kind of lock into. And I'll get to that a little bit more in 2 minutes. The second thing he says is, and God has put a sense of eternity in our minds in such a way that we can't get rid of it, but we also don't know from beginning or to the end what will happen. Right? So we're kind of locked into this mystery. That it's not ours, but we live in the midst of it. Right? And that means that there's like a whole different dimension to our life that is completely apart from the Henry Ford assembly line, one damn thing after another kind of mode that we generally live within. Right? And in the general course of our life and the way we think about time, we think about today, tomorrow, maybe next week. Every once in a while we plan a little bit further than that, right? But we're living very close to the ground most of the time, and in the way that we're actually perceiving the time that we have. Right? How many of you basically get up in the morning and think, what do I have to do today? Rather than, what's been the whole nature and shape of my life so far? I can tell you that I'd much rather wake up with that second question. But I generally don't think I have time for it. And if I did take the time for it, I would probably be able to rejoice a lot more. Right? But I'm thinking only of what's right in front of me. And that is the way in which, as Augustine said, sin is homo incurvatus in se. It's being wrapped around yourself. That you don't have the ability to step back and actually try to perceive you, your time, your day, your family, anything from the perspective of what the writer of Ecclesiastes brings after the dialectic. There is this eternity that we are involved in, and how do we work with that? Right? And I think that when we get to the point where we can actually contemplate our life and our time through the lens of the time of God, then the capacity to rejoice always becomes much clearer. Right? And we say this all the time, and sometimes it brings me to tears. As it was in the beginning, is now, and will be forever. Right? That if you understand what's being said there in the redemptive purposes of God, then it doesn't matter what's happening. You have the capacity to say, I have reason to rejoice. I have incredible reason to rejoice. And that rejoicing then makes it possible for us not to ignore what's happening, but to apply ourselves to it without bringing to bear the baggage that as human beings we take, which is, I want something back, this is how it's owed, and all of that fight and struggle to get what we think we deserve.